I will get us started. I've been saying how enthused I am and how much I've been looking forward to this because this is podcast number 2 for the Tell Me More series. And in our first session, as we kind of worked out the kinks, it was Therese and I just chatting amongst ourselves. But we always had the hope and the expectation that we would invite folks in to be in conversation with us. And in particular, our hope, because Therese and I's work exists sort of external to the organizations that we serve. We get called in for programs, we get called in for bespoke coaching, consulting services. The value that we look to create is within the organizations. Part of what drives us is to meet people where they're at, which is within these firms and organizations. But part of the reason we launched this podcast was to talk to folks inside those enterprises, inside of those firms, with the soot, the daily dust and juice and joy and sweat and all of that goodness of being of doing the work alongside these other leaders that we hope to serve. And when we brainstormed a short list of folks that we wanted to talk to, at the very top, the tippy top, numero uno, as Therese is saying, was Julia Jackson. If it doesn't embarrass her too much, I'm just going to share a little bit about why and all the rad things that she has done and does, and then we'll ask her a question and get this conversation going. How does that sound, y'all?
Sounds great.
And welcome, Julia. Thanks for doing this with us.
Thank you.
So Julia Jackson got many degrees from Rutgers. She got her bachelor's, she got her master's in library and information sciences, and her Juris Doctorate from Rutgers. She's also a certified executive coach via Columbia Universities. That's a lot of degrees that she's gathered. She passed the bar in New York and then spent 15 years in law firm management, which means she served in the corporate departments of several international law firms as an advisor to the partnership of those firms. So she was director of attorney development at Ropes and Gray. She was a corporate coach at Cleary Gottlieb and head of coaching at Vincent and Elkins. And she has recently launched Effective Lawyering, which Therese and I are fanboy, fangirl number 1 and number 2, which Effective Lawyering, which you all have to look up. Actually pause now and do it right now, or you can do it afterwards. But she offers thought partnership for lawyers and teams who simply want more. So she offers individual and group coaching and core skills workshops for firm partners, for senior attorneys, for deal teams, for management committees. And what's exciting about it is that she's now offering all of that experience and expertise, not only to these firms that she has some history with, but to a broader population. More lawyers, more leaders can access all of the brilliance. You all are going to get to know a little bit that Therese and I have been lucky to get to know over the last several months. So look Effective Lawyering up. We'll talk a little bit more about it at the end of the podcast, but welcome, Julia. We're so excited to have you.
I'm so excited to be here. It's really the highlight of my month, and I really appreciate the invitation.
We would talk to you off the record any day, but it's nice to have it recorded too. I wanted to kick us off with a question around, obviously you were a lawyer, and then at some point this idea of coaching must have crossed your path when you were on the other side of things. And I would be curious to hear, like, what was that? When were you in your legal profession sort of introduced to coaching? And what was your experience of kind of realizing that you wanted to move closer to that sort of work?
Yeah. So I'd say that in the early days, right after I had stopped practicing law, I was at Cleary Gottlieb and I had joined the talent team, and coaching was all the rage. And we were starting a coaching program, and I started their coaching program, and I started interviewing people like you and other actors and certified coaches and finding out about this. And I had realized that I was doing it from instinct internally already, coaching my peers and my colleagues and people on my team. And the more I thought about it, I had been doing this almost my whole life. My very first memory of coaching was driving up Interstate 95 with my mom lawyer, and she was having a panic attack, and she couldn't get up the highway. And I coached her through it. We had to get home, right? And we got home because I coached her through it. And I was like probably 8 or 9 or 10 years old maybe at the time. That was my earliest memory of coaching a lawyer. And it
Mm,
wasn't in her capacity as a lawyer. She was merely the driver. And I was kind of in the driver's seat, but in the passenger seat and also actually literally in the back seat.
wow.
And I was like, Mom, we can do this. And we got home. And that was my very first memory of actively coaching someone through a situation, like a live situation. And from there, I just kind of leaned into it.
What a powerful metaphor to be not in the driver's seat, but to be kind of driving vicariously or at least helping someone get to where they're going. Wow, I really love that. You mentioned you had been doing it by instinct. I find that's true for coaches and facilitators. Many of them that I meet, it's sort of dispositional as much as it is technique. Can you say a little bit more about that disposition? How do you recognize a born coach or a coach by instinct? What does that look like to you?
My deepest drive is being curious. As a kid, they used to call me Scoop Jackson. That was my nickname. Because I was always listening and I always wanted to be in the mix and know everybody's position and what was going on. And I always had FOMO for the places I wasn't. And so the curiosity just about what drives people, what turns them on, what makes them tick, what drives them crazy, right? And then broader than that, organizations and how they work and all the complexities there. That's what kind of was the fundamental underlying force behind me just being naturally oriented toward coaching, active listening, wanting to know more, kind of being nosy at first, but then being informed and understanding like, why do you do what you do?
Mm,
What are you afraid of? What are you resisting? Why? And then how does the brain work and how do the chemicals work in the body and how does it all come together? And then how can we kind of manipulate it in a way that serves us?
I just want to go back to the car story for a minute because actually I do talk about coaching as being in the passenger seat of a car. That's a metaphor that I've used with no direct life experience, but I've said I like to think about it as being in the passenger seat, helping someone go where they're going, but not grabbing the wheel, not telling them what to, just, and it's so interesting that you had that experience at such a young age because you couldn't drive. Do you know what I mean? Like you were only in a position to assist, you were only in a position to help. And so in some ways it like underscores this idea of pure coaching, like because you can't grab the wheel. I'm like thinking if you were 16, you might have just gotten in the driver's seat, but you had to sort of hone the practice of like, what can you do for someone that's absolutely not taking the wheel, And so I think it's like just to dip back, I think it's like a really nice way to think about like how purely coaching is in support of someone else.
Yeah. It was selfish of me at the time, and I was almost aware of it. Like, I wanted to get home, and we were in
mm,
this situation. But I also felt my power at such a young age that I could help this person who I needed, like, get us to where we both needed to be. And it just made me feel so powerful,
mm.
right? That I could bring us home.
I think one of the things that I think I was, I don't want to say late to, but it took me a while to arrive at, and now I feel very zealous about sharing it, is that thing which seems inborn and might have been of sort of organic value to your family and friends and those around you is a power that creates great value, not only as it should in sort of neighborhoods and dinner tables and friend groups, but also in the marketplace, also as people pursue value and profit and what else. Like I think I'm playing catch up to take full ownership of, hey, I'm here in this room with research and I'm here in this room with my studies, but actually primarily I'm here in this room with that curiosity that's been around since as long as I can remember. And so seeing it reflected back. And one of the things that made us really want to talk to you, Julia, is that I've almost exclusively stayed on the outside of organizations offering that value, sort of being tapped in right? But your journey took you into a firm. You built out that service within a firm. Or it sounds like at Cleary, you were part of growing that. You've also been part of that resource in other firms. And now your journey has sort of taken you to say, okay, now I can be back to offering it to multiple. Can you tell us what you've learned from the inside and the outside, and if
Yeah,
you can distinguish those, or just talk about that, because
yeah,
that feels very unique to me.
yeah. It's a great point. So look, lawyers are a particular type, right? And they think in a particular way. They're very autonomous. They're highly educated. They mostly pursue excellence, right? They're clinically trained and driven and all of these things, skeptical. They have certain things in common, right? And then they're different. There's all types, right? And there's all types of disciplines of law and types of practice and for profit and nonprofit and government, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I have spent the past 15 years in big law firms. And in big law firms, you understand the culture on the inside, you understand the dynamics, the power dynamics, you understand the client base, the platform, and the teams, right? All of these things. You start to get a sense of the market, but your paycheck is cut from the same place that all the lawyers' paycheck is cut from, right? So you're inside. When you're outside, there's a distance, and right, and so your clients frequently relate to you differently because internally, your clients will often like question where your loyalties actually lie. Who's your client? Is your client the firm or is your client me? What if we're not aligned, right? And who are you going to be loyal to? Are you a double agent, right? And so these kinds of things are really tricky to navigate. And on the outside, you get trust more quickly. People tell you so much, but you don't have the benefit of understanding the current dynamics, who the bullies are, who's in power, who's grasping for power, who's on their way out, who's at the cool kids table and who's kind of in the margins. All of this stuff that kind of matters from a personal experiential level, you know.
Yes.
So there's benefits to both. I think ideally internal coaches work with external coaches together hand in hand, and they both bring
Mm,
different and similar things to the table. The reason I started effective lawyering is because I wanted to have more say over my time, less constraints internally as a member of a law firm or employee of a law firm, and I wanted to have a broader reach and a bigger scope. I want to reach more people. I want to diversify my client base a little bit as far as the types of lawyers and what they're doing, and also kind of have that built-in autonomy. I was a lawyer myself. I have a very high need for autonomy, and I like that.
mm,
My parents both hung shingles as lawyers, so I have a model for it, right? I come
oh,
from an entrepreneurial um, family, so that's helpful.
I'm curious about, as Alejandro said, the work that we do has us like dropping in and out of other organizations, and we know what the value is of what we do in the moment. You can feel if you're helping someone or if what you're saying is resonating. I'm curious from your experience within an organization, like what do you think coaching does for folks that if you were in a law firm that was highly successful and driven and all those things, but didn't have a coaching arm, what's lost? Like what does coaching actually provide on a granular level? What have you seen it do for people on the inside?
So it helps people transcend boundaries and limitations they put in place for themselves, right, over a course of a lifetime, right? And a lot of times what we do works for us. It gets us this far until it doesn't work for us. It stops working for us at some point. And then you need a thought partner. You need just somebody to hold your hand and say, okay, let's look at this. Let's create a process. Let's create a container. We can work together and let's get you past this. Let's help you figure out, get some clarity, figure out what your goals are and how you're going to achieve them. Chart a course, right? And if you have somebody committed to the process with you, you can do it. Like I live it, I see it, I do it literally every day with people. And sometimes it's like uncovering blind spots or just helping somebody reframe something, helping them kind of clear the fog a little bit, create time, holding them accountable. I coach on basic things like time management, right? To like big things like, am I in the right career for me? And these are questions that not just particularly lawyers, actors have them, doctors, all professionals, right? Every single human being has these questions. And that is something we all have in common. And so the benefit of being a former lawyer is that you kind of get buy-in immediately. You
Hmm.
walk the walk, and lawyers think they're exceptional, so there's that. Query whether it's true, but it's what we believe, right? And that makes it true. And so, having spent 15 years in big law firms, you kind of understand the dynamics, the extreme time pressure. You have to bill, literally like every hour. You have to bill 7 hours a day, sometimes 10 hours a day. If you're junior, 12 hours a day. And you're under a lot of pressure, right? And so, creating conditions to succeed under that pressure and always wanting to improve, you need support. And it's like a hyper competitive environment. You just need people in your corner to help get you through.
Yeah, it's funny because I love what you said about internal coaches working in tandem with external coaches. And what it made me smile because in some ways you've created that dynamic within yourself. Like the people who are hiring effective lawyering and working with Julia Jackson are in some ways getting the benefit of both of those that are talking to each other within you. And I just feel like, and I'll just say, I'll be candid about the reality of being a drop in external. Like there are moments, and maybe you've all experienced this, where I can sense that there are power dynamics or politics at play, as there are in any organization. Sometimes I have to clarify politics happen when there are any group of people sharing resources, a finite set of resources. So this is not to say politics as in a derogatory, but just the nature of dynamics when there are groups of people working with finite resources, politics will happen. I can feel in front of a room as an external facilitator, there's some unnamed things in this room that everyone but me knows about. And sometimes I don't even know enough to ask about them. Sometimes I have enough context where I can tease them out or get people talking about them in a safe way. But it's such a boon to either have a really good partner internally who's going to tee you up to do your best work as an external coach and give you some of that context, or as in your case, to have some of that experience, to know what those questions are, to be able to make some educated assumptions. Can you tell us, you don't have to sell Teresa and I about the value of this work. And I love that you say like you get to your own ceiling. And often what I tell with people who have skepticism about coaching is, hey, it's like anybody who had skepticism about therapy. When you meet a good one and you feel the value, you won't need to ask anybody else. You won't need to do a Yelp review. You'll just feel like, oh, that made my life a little easier. Um, can you tell us a story, Julia, of like when you saw it happen in real time, the value
Yeah,
of it?
yeah. So, look, I coach on everything from, somebody walked in my office the other day and they were like, I just kind of feel bleh. Everything is just kind of meh, you know?
Yes.
And like everything's okay, but it's all just kind of like mediocre. And so so what are you even dealing with there, right? And then another person 2 days before walked into my office in a total crisis, like had just gotten what we call a message, which is a kind way of saying like you need to find a new job,
Mm.
and has a family to feed, right? And like is like freaking out, has kids, has a mortgage, like all this grown up stuff, real responsibilities. Was not expecting this message, which is unfortunate, but happens all the time in law firms. And so it really runs the gamut. I have the privilege of working with really, really, really smart people, driven, hardworking, disciplined, like I said, like really high educated, like you work with these people too.
Hmm.
And they're in these conditions where, they're pretty senior, they're not going to get promoted, they're not going to become a member of the firm, and they're picky about their job, they're super well trained, they need to find their next step, right? The firm is invested in them and placing them as a loyal client. They want the right job, and like whatever their motivations are, they probably want to be paid, they want it in the right location, they want the right like authority and title and responsibility and all of that. And so I had this particular woman in Texas, and she didn't want a future at the firm, and that was kind of mutual. It would all worked out, but she didn't know where she was going, right? And she didn't know how much time she had, or how, like, did she have to settle? Like, nobody was really talking to her for her to know things. And we started working together, and we did all the things. There's a whole checklist of things you have to do to find a new job. And I worked step by step with my clients in that. But then the point came, and like her deadline was approaching, and she called me freaking out. She had already had like 3 job offers. She turned them all down. They were all great jobs. Turned them all down. Wanted something else. Like, none of those jobs were right. And she called me, and she's like, like, I don't feel protected here. Like, I don't think anybody's going to like stand up for me and give me a little more time. And all of that was true. And I loaned her the confidence to pause and do what was right for her and take a risk and not make a decision until she had the job she wanted. And I advocated for her a little bit in the background. And she ended up taking a little more time, getting her dream job, becoming a loyal, like really well paid client of the firm, well paying client of the firm. And everybody was happy. She's so happy. The firm is happy. Her team was happy. Her sponsors were happy. I was happy for her. Her family was happy. There was this dynamic with her husband, and he was putting pressure on her. And some of the sessions were just full of like just waterfalls, because she was getting pressure in every direction, and you just don't know with your clients. And it was like we took a risk, right? And I gave her permission, and she totally embraced it, and she was courageous, and it worked out for the best, and she's like a total success.
Do you feel like it just makes total sense to me. I know I put myself in the shoes of someone in that situation. I would need someone external to me to say, hey, you can slow down. You can breathe. I'm going to tell you can, and then we're going to do it together. But I also recognize that there are some people, maybe based on whatever upbringing, culture, who think about the not being able to self-source that as some sort of deficiency. Or do you feel like, especially with folks who are so high achieving, that there is a sense that needing coaching means you can't do it for yourself, or like that there is a hesitance to go to it as a tool in your toolbox?
Michael Lewis used to say, probably still says, what distinguishes the great from the really great is a coach. It's like, it's all the best in the world have coaches, right? And we all need them. And it's, there used to be, especially among lawyers, they're so judgmental. A lot of stigma there, and it's like, oh, if I need a coach, that must be remedial. Like, something's wrong with me. I'm going to get fired. I'm not good enough. I am not perfect. And like, first of all, you're not perfect. Like, that's so not what we're going for. We're going for progress, because perfect is a myth. Effortless perfection is all the rage at these big law firms. No, thank you. Like, we're checking that at the door, and we're going to be real, and we're going to be human. We're going to talk about the process. And so to me, it's like all cachet. I mean, from the beginning, it was all cachet and no stigma, because everybody has room to improve, right? And one of the challenges that as lawyers at corporate law firms is, like, partners somehow want you to come in like fully baked. And it's like, I constantly remind the partners, like, this person knows very little. They know a lot, but they know very little about what you do or how to do it. And this is a teaching institution. I know that's controversial. I get it. But honestly, it's the apprenticeship model. It's a teaching institution, and that's what makes it great, right? And that's why we love the new class that comes in every year, and it brings an infusion of energy and excitement and just all this joy and potential and possibility. And that's why I'm there, and that's why you're there, Therese, and that's why you're there, Ale, right? To come wrap our arms around these people and bring them up.
Julia, you mentioned like that this particular experience of coaching this woman, and that several sessions, were waterworks or people calling you in crisis, and one thing that comes up a lot in coaching is like, is this therapy? Like, it's about humanity, right? Because we are integrated people. And I wonder how you respond to the question, like, where is the line between coaching and therapy? Where does humanity necessarily come in? And then where are the boundaries? Or, you know what I mean?
Yeah. So look, therapy and coaching are different, right? And I approach them very differently. Therapy, I'm not going to really speak to therapy because I'm not a psychoanalyst, but
Mhm.
it can be a long, sometimes, not ending process where you uncover things and you do a deep analysis and so on and so forth. Coaching happens in a container with
Mhm.
a beginning and an end, and they're usually defined before the engagement begins, and there's goals, and there's you concretize things, you act toward very specific mile markers, and it may go on, right? Like some coaching engagements are for 6 months, and then you check in with your coach every so often, right? Or if you're a basketball player, you have a coach for a number of years and you get close with them, et cetera, et cetera. But you know you might touch on the same topics because what restrains you and what limits you is what it is, whether you're talking to a coach or a friend
Mm.
or a therapist or a rabbi. But coaching happens in like within parameters, and I'm a very goal oriented person. A lot of lawyers are. One of my children is very goal oriented, very
Mhm.
type A. That works well in coaching because like you're trying to get from A to F or maybe A to Z, and you're going to go through the steps, and I'm going to help you through it.
Mhm.
Psychoanalysis is deeper.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and I love that, and I would say the container is very clarifying as a distinction, often predetermined container, whereas certainly psychoanalysis, which is the kind of therapy I'm most familiar with, I know that there's different sorts, but um, it is ongoing because you don't know what you will discover within that space, and in fact, part of what I have come to understand psychoanalysis offers is the recurrence of the same shape is the many times you enter that exact same shape and how you meet it every week and what it reveals coming up against that backdrop sort of things show up that a really good a really good psychoanalyst will be able to illuminate, okay, well, what we might need to spend time on or want to spend time on, whereas a shape that is co-authored seems to define coaching for me, and also a bias towards action. I don't want to say that there isn't coaching that lives outside of that paradigm, but often we're here because we want to move the needle somehow. um I will, can I just say, this is we'll wrap to a question, but I don't think I've told Teresa or Ethan this. Julie, I think it'll be the first time I've started to get a real allergy to people um um throwing out the caveat, this is not therapy. I know this is not therapy. A lot of times participants will say, whoa, is this there or is this there? It often comes when there's a presence of any emotional content at all. And of course, I think that originated from a place of like wanting to distinguish, we're not trained therapists. Let's do the diligence, the rightful diligence of. But now I've started to see it as a sort of a kind of a weather vane at where we're at socially, that the presence of any emotion is sort of labeled as a therapy context. Because I really mean it could be anything that surfaces, any fear, concern, vulnerability, and somebody is liable to say, are we in therapy? Or, hey, I'm sorry, this isn't therapy. I think it might be therapeutic for us to be dimensional and open and honest with each other. And I'd love it if it were therapeutic, but it need not be therapy. I
But
guess I get passionate about it because otherwise it just limits the territory that the rest of us get to play in.
feelings are so scary.
Well, but I think also in like a lot of workplaces, you occasionally will lead workshops and someone will say, I really try to have conversations without any emotion in them. Like as if the gold standard in workplace is to be an AI bot, and that's achievable. And I think like the underlying truth, which we are obviously all intimately familiar with, is that we're people, you know, I mean, we're human beings who happen to go into these steel and concrete buildings and work. And there's just no divorcing your humanity from the paperwork and the emails and the conversations you have to have at work. There's just no way to do that. So yeah, the question of like, how can you talk about your humanity and integrate your humanity into your work in a way that's, you know, corporately acceptable or like, you know, feels appropriate to the workplace. It's a very interesting challenge.
Therese, I'm the rational one. You're the emotional one.
I am curious because I am with you, Therese. Like, there's that, I forget where it comes from. I'll try to find the attribution, which is like, some people think emotions are dangerous and need to be left out, but no, emotions are dangerous and need to be left in, like need to be put back in, like because they're such a powerful, and they also distinguish us from the robots. Julia, you've been in environments in which I imagine a lot of decisions are being driven by by the numbers that are produced on spreadsheets each quarter. And yet you're making a case in those contexts for much, I don't know, much more elusive, certainly much more long-term work. Can you tell us how you've approached that, what you've learned, and maybe where you've been successful making that case?
Yeah. It goes back to what Therese was just saying about like rationality versus emotion, right? And the fear of feeling anything. It's, you know, when you're talking to people who are running law firms that are all profit driven and it's all like quarter by quarter, you know, P&L, and it's like, okay, that's, I understand your business model and I understand how you make money and what drives you, and I understand the pressures and all the constraints and all of that, the client service, and I understand the numbers, but they're limited because underlying all of this is human performance, and we're not robots. And frankly, you don't want to be a robot either, you know, and you're all terrified that the robots are going to take your jobs away. So like, tell me how you're different. because that's not what we bring to the table. Like, what it's giving that makes you feel good. So you don't want to just talk to me about numbers. Like, the numbers are one way to measure, but what else is there? Are we just doing widgets here? Because if there's more, let's talk about that part. So I kind of just like interrogate the assumptions at the get-go, and some people like aren't ready for it. Like, if you're really too afraid to talk about what's really like in your way, then you might not be ready, and that has to be okay too. But I kind of reject from the outset this, you know, like this, if you're completely reluctant to deal with your own like humanity and limitations and just want to reduce everything to a spreadsheet, then I have to accept that. Like, I have to accept that as a professional.
Do you feel, specifically to that point, do you feel more liberated from without the organization now that you're coaching folks to really fully embody that you're talking about, the sort of underscoring of humanity and encouraging people to face their humanity? Are you freer to do that from without an organization than you were within, or?
Yes and no. I mean, you know, I am the founder and CEO of Effective Lawyering, right? And I am now running my own company. And I sympathize a lot with the heads of these law firms because they're out there hustling. They have to serve clients and find business. And I'm living that pressure, right? So in some ways, I sympathize with them a little bit more. I'm really just trying to serve the client. And whatever the client's agenda is what I'm working toward with them. And that's for the client to decide, not me. But as far as, you know, trying to convince people, sometimes when you're internal, you do try to persuade because you're under this pressure to like expand your budget. I'm free of that. It's a different pressure, but I'm a little bit free of that. So in that sense, yes, it's a little bit different, a little bit similar. I don't know if that answers the question, Therese.
It totally does. But I wonder if I can ask one follow-up, which is, you've mentioned to me also the quality of the coaching has changed in terms of how people are with you. And I wonder if you can talk about that and also talk about what you think that means.
Yeah. I think that when you're internal, there's always the skepticism that you're not actually a spy, right? That you're not just there to report back, to go collect information and report back to to management. And I understand that completely. Like, we're all paranoid. These are lawyers. They're trained to be skeptical and not, the best of them don't become cynical. But, your job is on the line, your livelihood, and you're not sure what's being reported back. And even when somebody, doesn't, if you know something, it's a burden and they're not trying to necessarily report back, but something comes out because they knew it and you're just not sure where the boundaries are. When you're external, there's distance, and like you're not on somebody's speed dial. You can't call them internally. You're not on their Slack or their Zoom or whatever the chat is. And that distance creates a sense of safety.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm really struck by something that you said. Well, two things there, Julia. You said that you don't want to be a robot, which uh, for me it activated something because as you know, Julia, Teresa and I's background is in the arts, and I still think that's one of the things that I lead with, in terms of what the way that we are in the room, and maybe a differentiator, and when it really helps, when it's really helpful, it turns into a permission for people to admit to us that there are things that light them up and that make them excited and giddy outside of the zeros and ones of whatever they do. It dimensional. Whenever somebody hears my background and they take the first possible break to let me know that they loved Wicked, or did I go to school with John Batiste, or something like that. It always reminds me, oh, we all want to be full. We all want to live in some part of our playfulness, some part of the mystery, some part of our connection to bigger things. And then what I really also appreciated was the reality. This is where I feel like you are such a teacher in this instance, is that you also coupled that with saying, and if they're not ready to meet me there, I also need to respond to that and still serve them, you know? And so I just wanted to thank you for that, because I think you said both sides. Chances are we have a hunch. I think the three of us share a hunch that it's there, that current of aliveness that we're all seeking, and the various places that people find it. And yet also our work is client services, Um, I'd love to see you at work making that shift, and is it challenging? I guess let me find a way to question,
Yeah.
like.
One of the things about working with lawyers, which I find fascinating and interesting, is the rigidity, right? They are valued, they are called upon for their counsel because they are disciplined and in some ways rigid. And they're not given permission generally to be creative and spontaneous. And so we think, right? And improvise. And the truth is the best lawyers do all of those things, which is why lawyers all want to be actors and think they're actors and frequently went to law school because they watched like Perry Mason or whatever, Law and Order, right? But they're so technical, like they're trained to like think in a very specific way. And so they're terrified frequently. I'm speaking in generalizations.
Mhm.
They're terrified to show their true selves.
Mhm.
It's like bring your true self to work, except if it doesn't like match these 10 aspects of you, don't bring it, and it's just like, oh my gosh. So like, and then if you bring your whole self and you don't fit into the mold, like you don't get promoted, or like, you feel like judged and shamed and like you don't fit in, like you're not at the cool kids table. And then you question everything and it creates doubt and all of this. And it's like becomes this like snowball of like a sense of inadequacy.
Mm.
So ultimately, I think, finding alignment with you and whatever your place of work, firm, job is the ultimate goal, which is how I approach coaching with lawyers, right? Who's my client? Is it the firm? Is it the individual lawyer? When I was internal, it was both, but external, it's kind of both too. Because like, if you don't want what they are offering, then it's not going to work anyway.
Yeah, it's short lived to sort of coach someone into being a mercenary. You know what I mean? Like to coach someone into like short-term games and looting the store while they can, sure, you might give them some short-term wins, but ultimately you're going to be back at the same place because like you said, there's a lack of alignment.
100%.
As we're talking, I'm getting like all these memories of coaching lawyers, and almost like an exhaust valve, like when they can walk into a room and just sort of talk about what's going on, that there's a safety in and a need in these high pressure jobs for there to be a container. And I love that we keep coming back to that analogy. It's almost like an auxiliary container to their career path where they can pit stop, let off the steam valve and work through. I also love when you said clear the fog, like just take some time to clear the fog to get a little more clarity and then maybe head back, right onto the path that they were on, but a little clearer or a little depressurized. And, maybe ultimately you're coaching them in or out of that career path that they're on. But I just love the idea of almost like a sidecar, like just a container that you hold as the coach and allow them to kind of safely dip out, clear the fog, and come back,
But also question how you measure success. Because in these places that are so up or out, kind of like pyramid schemes, don't tell them I said that. It's like they're the way you measure success, like you get the ring or you don't. And I really try to get us away from that. Like, let's talk about the process and the journey. Journey even sounds hippy dippy to some lawyers, but let's talk because things will, to your point, reveal themselves along the way. So let's talk about the process and not talk about the outcomes because we don't know what the outcomes are going to be. We can talk about what we want them to be and what feelings we'd like to have, why we do the work we do, where we find meaning. Is this purposeful work? Is money the most important thing? What motivates us, right? What motivates me is relationships. Just one of the reasons I love having coaching clients, having people like you in my network, people like you to bounce things off of. But what motivates you? And what are you looking for now? Let's talk about that, and let's acknowledge that in 5 years it might be different, and that will be okay, and we'll deal with that then. But let's talk about where we are right now.
So Alejandro and I have been turning this over a lot lately because what we both feel strongly, as you do as well, it's like the journey is the journey that actually is the quality of your life, right? Like that's deathbed stuff. How it all went down, not that you got to be partner, right? And yet, in today's culture, in American capitalism and corporate culture, the idea of the quarterly revenue, the idea of the bottom line, the idea of achievement, of becoming partner, like that is so strong and it's so strong in people's minds. And I'm wondering how you have like convinced people, if you have, or coached people into, like, if someone came to you and really just sort of had that like gold ring mentality, I want to be partner, I want to run this firm someday. Like, what is your sell to that person about why it's actually the journey and the how and the let's break this thing open and look at the way we're doing this that actually matters as opposed to that thing you have in your mind that's winning?
I do what you two are doing right now. I just ask questions. It's not my job to convince anybody of anything. It's my job to help them serve their agenda, whatever they say it is. But if it comes to be that they can slow down by working with me and take a pause and take stock and make sure that like what they say they want is what they actually want, then it's a win. But I really try to stay focused on meeting people where they are.
It makes me think of, gosh, I wish I knew more about, I'm going to probably need to go back and edit this to say the right words, but when eggs need to be incubated, like there's in order for them to hatch, that oftentimes they get put into some, I don't want to call it an oven, but something. And I just think about your work as applying your curiosity and what will hatch, when it will hatch, and what will be inside of it will be determined by this other person. But whether it's a chrysalis, you can grab at a metaphor better than the incubating eggs metaphor. But
It's not
what I
bad.
love is that you apply the benevolent pressure of your curiosity, the generous, kind pressure of your curiosity. We often now use terms like pressure test this, you know, pressure test this, sense test this, temperature check, but really what you're asking somebody to do is, hey, hold the shape for me. Be a container, be something I can bounce these things off. Let me know what bounces back and or resonates and what falls flat, And it just also reminds me that we're pack animals, And so whatever I was listening, I know it's probably bad form to mention another podcast in the middle of our podcast, but I was listening to Chloe Zhao, the director, talk about this on a podcast recently, where she says she has a bone to pick with Plato and Aristotle. Although they had a lot of great contributions, they set Western civilization on this sort of like rationality is king, atomized to understand, even though she has reason to believe that they had sort of mystic practice as well. They left that out of their writing, and they set us on this course of we should be able to take things apart and understand them. But that's just the half the story. The other half of the story is I need that bounce back. I need that sonar, to even find out if what I think is what I really think,
100%. And what's fascinating about working with lawyers is that we lean so heavily on the left brain with lawyers, and they're always like, you know, they're rewarded for like being rational and coming up with like all the left brain stuff.
Mm.
So working with lawyers as a very right brain person it's always fun for me because I'm always super right brained and they're always super left brained. Having been trained as a lawyer, I understand where they're coming from, but I'm always trying to draw them in, right, to the other side because as humans, there's a balance, right? We have both and striking the balance, I think is the path,
Mm.
right? I think is the path because while Plato and Aristotle didn't write about their mystical ideations, right? And
Mm.
we don't know about them as that. Of course it was part of it.
Yeah.
Right? You can't be who they became without being whole.
Yeah. Without being whole. Ooh, come on. Yes. Without being whole. I want to ask a final question about what gets Julia out of bed and eager to put on her slacks and get to work. Therese, I don't want to skip over anything you've got in
No,
lingering.
get
Yeah.
it.
And this can be a story, this can be a riff, but on those days that you, and I'm sure it's not every day because you're a human being like the rest of us, but on those days where you're like, let me at 'em. And it may be even in the context of effective luring because you've made this incredible bold move. Um, what is that fuel? What's the wind at your sails? Can you bring us a little closer to like, um, what have you, uh, what have you tasted that you are after more of, or what's the impulse towards working as hard as you do and doing the work that you do?
Thank you for asking.
Mm.
It's so rewarding to get a sense of bonding with people and empowering them to like live their truth because you can't take that away. Once you feel that and once you gift that and once you build that with someone, that's forever. That's permanent. And you pay it forward and then it kind of regenerates, right? And it kind of like it just it spreads. And I'm driven by relationships, right? Relationships feed me. Experiences feed me. My kids were complaining recently because I don't buy them stuff. I'm always like giving them experiences, mommy. It's so boring. And so they don't want to hear about like all the stuff that ends up in the landfill. Like they don't care. What so experiences drive me, people drive me, helping people drives me. Making somebody's day a little bit better is something I give to myself because it feels good for me, right? Having an impact on people. and like feeding people and they feed me back. That's
Mm,
really why, that's what drives me to coaching every day, because it allows me to do that. And I try to do it in an honest way. I truly believe that my clients have all the answers. And if I do my job effectively, I can help them find those answers and uncover those answers.
mm,
And leaning into process and excellence as we do it and being disciplined about the process is something I'm totally committed to because I really believe in it. I like to
mm,
have like really good hygiene, super organized. I think that's important to get through things. And then creating space and conditions for people to reveal what will be revealed.
mm,
But helping people and
mm.
giving them permission to be human. That really, really drives me. And just paying it forward because so many people did it for me and continue to do it for me.
I believe every word that you just said, and um, and if you get to know Julia, you feel that in your interactions with her, that it's a mutuality of help, like that it isn't pure altruism, that you seem to be renewed by when you can make a positive impact. You've made it on me. We haven't known each other for that long, but you have made that impact on me. In fact, when I learned about effective lawyering, I thought, man, it's the first time I've considered going to law school just so I can engage Julia's services. If you didn't check it out when I said it, get to know Julia's work online, effectivelawyering.com. And from the bottom of my itty bitty heart, from all of us who are small but growing, hopefully growing audience, we so appreciate you sharing some time with us, Julia.
Thank you guys so much. It was fun.
Thank you, Julia. You're the best.